Oh, the one thing I didn't say in the thing that I wish I had was that you and I watched Renfield together when you were here for my wedding.
Oh yeah.
And even when we were watching it, I could tell you were enjoying it a lot more than I was. And I guess I just don't like vampire stuff that much.
Mm.
Dude, never did it.
Welcome back to Never Did It. I'm Brad Garoon, and I'm here with Jake Ziegler. On Never Did It, we look back at the last 100 years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. And today is our very special 50th episode of Never Did It. We're covering 1929, and we have a very special guest who's a real person that Jake is going to introduce.
Yes, today joining us on the podcast, we have the Jeff Richardson, who I've mentioned a time or two on the podcast in the past. But Jeff is going to be joining us today to talk about the two films from 1929 that we have. Jeff, thanks for taking time out to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm honored. I don't know if I told you this beforehand, but this is actually my first podcast. So I'm a little nervous about that, but I have some confidence in the fact that I may not have been on a podcast, but I've been mentioned on podcasts many times. So
And you chose to do this episode, right? You wanted to do
I was given a peek behind the scenes. I was seen, given the list. I felt like I was behind the scenes at a magic show, and this is where I decided to go to the silent era, which is a little bit insane, but I have my reasons. I guess I'll get to them when we get to one of the films.
Okay,
So.
cool. Well, I just watched, like literally finished 5 minutes ago, the Werner Herzog remake of Nosferatu the Vampire. So why don't we start with the movie that Jake recommended for us, Nosferatu. Jake, why did you recommend Nosferatu?
Well, as we've talked about in our 20s movies before, the pickings are pretty slim with movies that I've seen from the 20s. I mean, I've seen 13 movies from the 20s total, and a majority of them are from this podcast, the movies that we've recommended for each other. But also, I mean, Nosferatu is a classic. It's one of the most highly regarded films from the silent era. A lot of horror movies have been influenced by it, and still take influence from it today. Plus, there was also a movie that came out in the 2000s called Shadow of the Vampire that was directly obviously made because of this, and has a really fun Willem Dafoe performance in it. So I thought you would enjoy it more than your Letterboxd review says that you did.
And before I get to that, Jeff, why did you pick 1929, period?
The little preview of things to come. I picked it because of Passion of Joan of Arc, which is, sort of the giveaway for the other film that we'll be
Sure.
discussing. And Nosferatu was a nice throw-in for me because I hadn't seen it in 20 years. The first film class I ever took was my freshman year of college, and I took a German cinema class, and we studied silent cinema, German Expressionism, and I wrote my final paper on Murnau. So at one point in my life, 20 years ago, I was a amateur expert, that's not an oxymoron, on Murnau, the director. So I thought it was time to revisit some of his stuff. So that was kind of the interest, pairing it with passion.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you're here then, because I hated this movie. I thought it was real bad. Okay, I'm going to trash it, and then I'll let you guys talk about, we'll get the bad out of the way, and then you guys can talk about why you think it's great and why everyone thinks it's great. It is, I mean, it's essentially like the birth of German Expressionism in film, right? So, okay. I thought it was super boring. I thought Gustav in the role of, it's Hutter in this version, right? Because this
I
is the
think this version
unauthorized.
is Hutton. I think they
Hutton.
make it Hutton in this one.
Sure.
But yeah.
But it's Harker for real.
Yeah.
I couldn't get over how clownish his character was, especially as I watched more remakes of it, and just thought about like Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Coppola version, or even Mel Brooks's version. I couldn't get over how just out of step with what I thought the movie was supposed to be, his performance was. And he was on screen, I don't know, the entire first half of the movie, which drove me nuts. I thought the Van Helsing analog felt really out of place in the second half, although the imagery of him watching the whatever it was growing was kind of cool. And I tried watching this because the music was really bothering me in the 100th anniversary edition that I was watching on Tubi. So I tried watching it with a few different soundtracks. There are, I think, conservatively, 12 easily accessible versions of this movie online through streaming sites and then just like on YouTube. Some of these versions are as new as like 2021 with metal soundtracks, which are we actually feel totally out of place. And I just couldn't stand it. I will say Max Schreck looked great as Count Orlok. He looked great. He looked so much better I thought he looked way better than Kinski. Probably not as good as Defoe. That was quite a get up. But yeah, I was bored out of my mind. It took me 3 days to finish, and I really hated it. And it made me realize that this and Joan of Arc, we'll get to it later, but it made me realize that I have an aversion to silent films that aren't comedies. I have a really hard time keeping focused. Okay, so that's it. I'm done complaining. Why did you guys like it?
Okay, I did. Yeah, since I did choose the movie, like Jeff, I did study it in a class, and it was a class that I really loved, and a professor that I really loved, and I have fond memories of that. I also saw the movie at the Traverse City Film Festival. RIP, when that was a thing, and I saw it with a live organist, and again, so I have very positive, fond memories of that. And also for me, the movie, it's called Nosferatu, and yeah, Hutton is in a whole lot of the movie, and he's not great, but the movie is Nosferatu for me, and yeah, Max Schreck is he's just awesome, and that's the my main memories of the movie is seeing him and the way they portray the vampire in this. I mean, vampire movies, there's a million of them now, so many of them, the vampires have this like kind of glamorous sort of touch to them. You think about some of the more recent modern examples, like your Interview with the Vampire, where they, the vampires look like Brad Pitt and Antonio Banderas and Tom Cruise.
It's cute that you call a 30-year-old movie modern.
Yeah. I mean, compared to Nosferatu,
true.
It's a little more modern, but or even like once we get to like the Twilight series or whatever. Really, I love the portrayal of him as just like disgusting with the the nails and the the teeth and just everything about the way he looked and the way he moved. And I just think it's a really interesting movie in that sense. And I love watching him. More than anything. Yeah, no disagreement on the Hutton thing. He's ridiculous and a clown, and it's not great. But I do love the everything Max Schreck does with the Nosferatu character.
It's funny. I'm listening to both of you talk, and I don't disagree with either of you that much. I know that doesn't really sound possible, but it is a classic. I also think it's kind of boring. I think I wrote in my notes, Hutton is ruining the first half of the film. Like that was almost literally one of the things I wrote as I was watching it, because he is so bad. I think it's kind of fascinating to watch something that, even if it's a little boring, it's 90 minutes of my day. It's the first Dracula movie, possibly the first vampire movie. I forget the history there exactly, but that's kind of a neat thing to see. And I think the imagery is, I think we all kind of agree at times, even you, Brad, would admit the imagery is fantastic at certain moments. I had a sort of vision when I was watching it because there's so many famous shots that you've probably, even if you haven't seen the movie, you may have seen Max Schreck in the makeup. You may have seen the shadow walking across the wall, Nosferatu in the window. And I just had this sort of sense that, I was kind of bored through a lot of it, but I felt like the meme of Leonardo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood pointing at the TV. I'd be sort of bored, and then I think, there it is. That's the shot. That's him. That's the letterbox profile for the movie with the masks in the background. That was kind of fascinating and fun. And I do think even beyond some of the famous imagery, Murnau studied art history, and I think that the technology of 1922 doesn't really allow him to create images that impress us today, other than the spooky stuff with the makeup. But I think there's some of the compositions he's trying. I mean, you can sort of tell even some of the sort of boring stuff at the castle at the beginning. The framing of those seems very much like painterly.
I learned this. I was reading Ebert's review, and I didn't know this either. And I don't know, Jeff, maybe you remember this. And I'll just read this right from his review, because it's just one little paragraph here. But it says, Ebert said, 2 of the key sequences in the film now follow. Both are montages in which simultaneous events are intercut. That's a routine technique today, but Murnau is credited with helping to introduce the montage. And here we see Orlok advancing on Hutter while in Bremen, his wife Ellen sleepwalks and cries out a warning that causes the vampire to turn away. He advances and retreats through an archway shaped to frame his bat-like head. Later, after Hutter realizes his danger, he escapes from the castle and races back to Bremen by coach, while Orlok travels by sea, and Murnau intercuts the coach with shipboard events and Ellen restlessly waiting. So, I mean, he is credited with kind of using the montage in movies first, and I thought that was worth pointing out. I didn't know that or remember that or anything. I think that's neat.
That's cool.
So I don't know. I think there's a lot of interest in watching the film. I'm bored, but I don't really, I kind of knew I was going to be bored. Like I was just kind of, all in on it. I was, happy to watch it. It's a classic historically. I don't know, if I would really say I enjoyed watching it, but it's got a lot going for it.
So did you both get a chance to watch Shadow of the Vampire and the Herzog remake?
Yes.
Yes, I did too. Yep.
Before I get to that, I have to bring the vibe down a little bit again. And I can't put this at the feet of Murnau or Nosferatu because it really is a Bram Stoker issue. So the first off, a little background. The Stoker estate did not give permission to Murnau to make this movie, which is why it's not Dracula, why all the characters' names have changed, why the appearance of Dracula is not what we're familiar with. Although if you watch Coppola's version, there's many different ways that Dracula looks throughout the book based on, when and who's looking at him and whose point of view it is. But Dracula is really anti-Semitic. In the Bela Lugosi version, he's wearing a Star of David. He brings plague from Eastern Europe to the Good West. It has a big nose and does his Mr. Burns finger thing, like the anti-Semitic memes. So it was tough for me to not like always be looking for these tropes, which is why one of the things I liked much more about Herzog's movie was what the effect was of Dracula and he's Dracula, right? Because now Dracula's in this, by the 70s, Dracula's in the public domain. He can use all the names again, but he's enamored of his German countryman's movie. So he makes sort of a spiritual remake, but is allowed to.
He calls it the greatest German film of all time.
Right, which is insane.
It's kind of insane, yeah.
I'll say it's insane because his movie's better. Like The Shadow of the Vampire is better than Nosferatu, at least in my opinion. I mean, it's much more atmospheric. There are times when so it's really frustrating is you can only find the English dubbed version. It's not all dubbed. A lot of the scenes were filmed in English, but some of these actors couldn't do it, so they're just dubbed over in English. I couldn't find the straight German version on a streaming site.
It's on Canopy for me.
I should have looked on Canopy then.
Okay, well, I know Canopy varies by region sometimes. So in Michigan,
yeah, it does. Right, because mine's through the Jersey City Library. I did find 2 versions of the German version, but they had Spanish or Swedish subtitles, so that was useless to me. But what I liked was what Dracula symbolized coming over and bringing the plague was different, because in his version, the German town that he winds up in, Breslin, I think it's called, sure. they're stuck in this like bourgeois nightmare. The coolest visuals of the movie are the way the rats bring the plague to town and sort of remove all of the capitalist bourgeois trappings, which could be read as Jews are bringing communism to our town allegory, but it's not seen as disastrous because everyone's sort of freed to live in a more down-to-earth way. And then they die and the rats come and take over, which isn't ideal, but it just felt a little less violent to me, like a little less hostile, which I liked a lot. And then, unfortunately, I didn't think that Kinski looked great as Dracula.
That was my main thing with him, because I liked the movie overall too. But yeah, that just like he was too white. It looks like it was like an Uncle Fester kind of look. And
yeah,
it didn't work for me.
And his teeth and his nails looked like paper rather than teeth and skin.
Really outside of how he looked, which, was a little bit distracting at first, but then, you just kind of get used to it after a while. I didn't care if I looked, but I liked it other than that. I was actually very surprised at how closely it matched the story beats of the Murnau film. I thought it would be very different, but it's like everything just kind of goes almost beat for beat with the Murnau movie. And I don't,
That's the Dracula story. That's also, I mean, you can add here and there, but that's the Coppola movie also follows those beats.
Which I've actually never seen. That's another one of my never did it. So that's kind of surprising.
It's also not amazing. I mean, visually, it's unbelievable, but I just don't think this is an interesting story. I just think it's a boring story.
But it's captivated the world for century for whatever reason. I mean, there's some reason. I mean, just last year, the last voyage of the Demeter was released, and that's taking one chapter of the Dracula story and extrapolating it into a whole movie. And it's not a great movie by any means, but yeah, Jeff, do you know about this movie? Did you even hear?
I knew about the movie, but I knew it was maybe a vampire movie. I didn't realize that it was about the Dracula voyage.
Yeah, it's just about the part where he travels by ship, but where he's just on the ship. Like that's the whole movie, where he terrorizes the people on the ship. Yeah,
it's 10 minutes in every other movie. It's an entire movie in that movie.
Yeah, so they stretch it out to like 90 or 100 or whatever in this movie. And the only reason I saw it is because it was a finalist for the makeup Oscar this year, and the makeup was pretty good.
It had Liam Cunningham. He's awesome.
The Herzog movie, I thought was pretty good overall, but not. It's probably not one I would go back to. Now that I've seen it for the purposes of this, and watched it with in concurrence with Nosferatu and Shadow of the Vampire. I mean, I think I'm good.
I had seen this film before I went to college. I think I watched this on a Laserdisc in high school, and I did not like the movie. I found it really boring. I don't know what my sensibilities were there. And so I was excited to watch it again, especially after just watching the original Nosferatu. And I have to say, I became really enamored of this film by the end. I was totally not expecting it. The first half an hour, 45 minutes went by, and I have a lot of the similar thoughts, I think, like you did, Jake. I was like, oh, this is cool. It's like you get to see Herzog updating his favorite film, and it's almost like the Leo meme again. I mean, I was just sort of pointing at the screen. There he goes. He's doing the scene from the first movie. But it was kind of slow, and I thought it was kind of a little dull. And that was kind of my memory of watching it as a teenager. And then somehow in the second half, I got totally hooked. And I just really like, I mean, I guess maybe this isn't an original idea for this movie, and I certainly people have explored all the themes of vampires and how they never die. But I just thought the film sort of snuck up on me how it had the themes of Klaus Kinski's Nosferatu or Dracula being so lonely and like craving of love, more than blood. And somehow that really started to click with me. And then you couple that with the plague stuff, which I thought that was fantastic. I mean, I can't believe I'd forgotten that was such a huge part of Herzog's version. I mean, that's kind of where he deviates. I mean, the plague, I guess Murnau gives some attention to the plague, and he's got the shot of the coffins walking down the street, which is another great composition. But Herzog really goes all in. And like Brad is saying, there's that, the town descends into chaos, but then there's almost a joy to it. There's like a deathly joy. Everyone's dying and people are just out in the streets partying. There's jugglers and there's like a Last Supper scene. I mean, it's clearly like a Last Supper setup that just visually, and there's rats everywhere. I mean, the rats are a part of Nosferatu, the original. I mean, it's also, I guess, memorable in that, but Herzog goes all in on the rats, and he has some great music that he puts in his score. I mean, the score is, I know there's Popol Vuh does a lot with, I don't know, there's some sort of experimental European band, and they did the music in Aguirre, The Wrath of God, which I love, and I'd kind of forgotten they did the music in this as well. And I just started to really vibe with this film when the plague stuff was going on, and the Dracula was, Klaus Kinski was just being crazy. There's a whole shot where Kinski just runs away from the camera in a big square at night, an empty square, and he just kind of runs away with his hands up, flailing about, and it lasts for like 5 to 10 seconds, and it's just insane. I mean, it's sort of like, what are we supposed to think is happening here? But the vibe of the movie was just totally working for me. Yeah, I ended up really loving this, and it shocked me because I was expecting, and even 30 minutes in, I thought, this is kind of a boring movie. So yeah, I guess I have a lot to say about that, but I don't know if any of that makes sense with you guys. But
have you seen any of Alejandro Jodorowsky's movies, like
Never,
El Topo?
no.
Or so I think you'd really like them because, I mean, I haven't seen any of them all the way through. After watching this, I really want to. It's funny, it made me want to watch Jodorowsky movies more than it made me want to watch more Herzog movies because his compositions.
Kinski's in those, right?
Jodorowsky mostly casts himself. But,
okay. Oh, that's right.
But they're visually very similar. After we did our Dune episode, I wanted to watch more Jodorowsky because we watched Jodorowsky's Dune and he just seems like he's insane and his movies are insane. But the things that resonated with me about Nosferatu the Vampire are things that had me curious about Jodorowsky. So I think that's the direction I want to go in next there.
It really made me excited that there's a new version coming out. I mean, do you guys know this, right? I mean, I think we should mention that Robert Eggers is making a Nosferatu that's supposed to come out on Christmas Day 2024. Seeing how Herzog had what he had found in the Murnau to sort of play up, which I think is really the plague stuff, and he adds this element of Dracula being sort of sympathetic and lonely. And I'm like, what is Eggers going to do with this? And I don't know. It just really made me excited in a way that I wasn't before watching that Herzog.
Watching Kinski's Nosferatu, I was like, well, Bill Skarsgård. So he's playing Nosferatu. And watching Kinski, I was like, oh yeah, perfect. I mean, it's a little bit typecasting for him now. I mean, he's only doing villains and they're always the gross ones, but his bug eyes are perfect for it. Eggers has no misses. So I'm very confident that it'll be good. I have no idea. I'm hoping he does something different, because I don't want to see this again. Every Dracula movie is the same. Nothing he's made. I mean, granted, he did Hamlet, but he did Hamlet in a way that really kind of blew my mind. Ended in a freaking volcano. So I don't know, maybe this will end on an iceberg. I don't know. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's going to take on this story, I mean, he's the guy I would think would be the right choice. So
yeah, it's interesting because his movies, they're horror movies, but they're not very violent. I would say The Northman is probably his most violent and least scary movie. So I'm really, and then this story is not particularly violent, and we'll get to it in a second, but like even the sort of kooky satire of the movie is not so violent. So I wonder what he's going to do. I'm stoked. How did Hutter get back to England?
I think like on a horse, and then at one point he was on a carriage.
Yeah, right? I think it was horse and carriage. Yeah,
over the water. I mean, are they? They're in Germany. They're not in England. They're in Germany.
I think that's the one. Okay. That's why Nosferatu is Nosferatu and Dracula is Dracula, right? It's Germany.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that screwed me up. Watching the remake, that screwed me up. I was like, wait, he's only in a carriage.
Yeah, okay. And it's crazy that he beats Dracula back in the original. At least he beats him back, and Dracula's on a boat.
I thought that was a pretty cool touch, the way that Herzog shot it, where he tied the captain. Well, the captain in the original tied himself to the hull. I don't remember if we saw that happen in the remake, but I love the way that the ship pulled into and then crashed along the bank of the canal. Even though whatever technology they were using, whatever camera they were using, kind of made it, and the music made it feel like a television show versus a movie. In fact, The dub a lot of the time reminded me of The Room because these people are not native English speakers and the dialogue's
No.
bad. But Bruno Ganz, he's great. I know he's most famous now for playing Hitler in a meme, but
Yes.
but
Yeah,
he's
he's really
terrific.
good. Yeah. I don't think we can move on without mentioning that in the original Nosferatu, there's a hyena
Yeah,
supposed to be a werewolf.
yeah, very
I
cool
mean,
looking.
that's like really bad. I mean, just to Brad's point about how some things are dated. Like, what did people think werewolves looked like, and did people not know what hyenas were? I mean, that's really hilarious.
So after watching Babylon, I'm more of the opinion that filmmakers just didn't care.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that could be. That's right. Weimar Germany, they were all just at the cabaret.
Right. Right. They didn't know what was coming for him. Let's talk about Murnau and whether or not he cared. And just do like a brief touch on Shadow of the Vampire. So I don't know how to pronounce this director's name, but it was directed by Elias Merhige.
Sure.
Merhige?
Yeah, your guess is good as mine.
This is so he's an indie director. This is far and away his most popular movie. He's done a couple other movies like are not well regarded, like Suspect Zero and Begotten. Although Suspect Zero does have Jake's boy Aaron Eckhart in it.
I do love Aaron Eckhart.
Yeah, you do. You're an Aaron Eckhart guy.
Yep.
And it stars John Malkovich as Murnau and Eddie Izzard as Gustav, which I have to say is inspired casting because he's portrayed as a bad actor who only puts in a good performance when confronted by a real vampire. So I thought that part I loved. And then,
Yeah.
as Jake mentioned earlier, Willem Dafoe living his life's purpose as Nosferatu Dracula, and a few like Udo Kier's in this, and he's
Yeah.
like it seems to really not care that he's in this movie.
Standing around mostly. Yeah.
Not acting, just responding. I mean, I know they say acting is reacting, but he's not really reacting.
No.
You mentioned, Jeff, that you were kind of bored during the first half of Herzog's movie both times you watched it. I was really bored the first half of Shadow the Vampire, and then Carrie Elway showed up, and it became a different movie. It became the movie it was meant to be, which is just like a goof, and I started enjoying it a lot more.
I feel that too. I don't think I remembered it was supposed to be funny because I'd seen it before, and at a certain point, you realize, oh wait, this is kind of hilarious, and like, oh, I think they know it's hilarious, and then you start to enjoy it a lot more.
Right. When Elway shows up and when I forget the woman's name who played the lead, but when her boobs are just flopping around, I was like, this movie's not serious.
Well, he's got a great line right when he shows up too. He asks, he goes, "Oh, is the camera loaded?" He goes, "Yeah, it is." "Ah, so am I." And like, okay, yeah, this is great now. Yeah.
He's very funny. You forget he's so great. He's essentially playing. Oh, you haven't seen it. He's essentially playing the same character he played in Bram Stoker's Dracula, but
that's funny.
Like in real life, right? And so it's kind of meta casting, which is cool.
Oh, yeah. Huh, that's really cool.
So I liked it. I didn't love it. It still drags, and the plot doesn't make any sense at all. But as a goof, okay. But this is the weirdest thing. I thought it was going to be a real telling of the making of Nosferatu. So I was excited to watch it after not liking Nosferatu to get some insight into what was going on. And I got none because Murnau is just a murderer who will do anything to get his movie made, including hire a bloodthirsty cannibal to play actually a vampire to play Dracula. It's pretty funny. What'd y'all think of it?
I really liked it, but I hadn't seen it in a long time either. So kind of like Jeff said, I've forgotten how funny it was. I had kind of had a different memory of it, but I like, number one, I like movies that are about making movies. So even if they're like a series, if it's about like a serious movie about making movies, or if, as this one turned out to be like a really goofy movie about making movies. But yeah, I had totally forgot the tonal, maybe not shift of the movie, but yeah, it starts off a little dry, like a little slower, and then it just kind of kicks into a different gear and gets really really goofy and silly. But I mean, like you said, Willem Dafoe is just, I mean, of all the crazy insane roles he's played before, I mean, this one, I think this is the movie where nobody ever actually saw him out of makeup because it took so long to get him into all of that. He was there so early every day, like nobody actually met him out of the out of the whole thing until the shooting was over. But I mean, the makeup is great in this. It was Oscar nominated. He was Oscar nominated. Fortunately, he still hasn't won one, but I mean, he's so good in this. And like Malkovich is so great as the guy who just kind of slowly loses his mind as the movie goes on. And he's doing what's that drug that they do?
Laudanum.
I'm not familiar with laudanum. Is it like a...
Oh, you've clearly not watched Deadwood. It's all they do all the time.
Yeah,
I
thought
think
it was like
it's heroin.
Yeah, so I thought heroin was big back then. So yeah, then he's doing his drugs and trafficking his actors and just it really goes off the wall, especially in the last like half hour or so. So yeah, I really like it. I don't quite love it, but I really like it. It's a lot of fun, which I didn't expect to say about it.
Yeah, I think Willem Dafoe's performance is hilarious. I mean, in a sneaky way. You don't like at first, oh, he's just kind of this creepy vampire, but then he starts talking and he actually seems like he really wants to act in the movie. I mean, there's a few where Murnau gives him notes and I mean, I was expecting him to be like, what are you talking about? Like, why are you telling me how to act? But he actually takes the notes. He's sort of like, oh, okay, I'm reading my paper. Like, yes, I am a vampire, but I'm also an actor. It's like he's just looking for something to do. And I think that's, I think it's kind of like almost like it's kind of, I don't want to be mean, but it's kind of like a bad movie that's saved by, or maybe like a badly made movie that's saved by incredible performances and actually a pretty funny script. And somehow the filmmaking doesn't, you can tell things have been chopped out. I feel like the story is a little bit,
It doesn't play at all.
yeah, no, it doesn't. It feels like things have been cut out. It's kind of jumps around a little bit, but the script is actually pretty funny, and Willem Dafoe is incredible. I think it's great that you actually kind of feel sympathy for him. My favorite scene is maybe they're sitting around the fire and the two drunk guys, and he starts talking about how he doesn't even remember who he was, and they say, can you turn people into other vampires? And he says, I can't do that anymore, I'm too old. And then he pauses and he says, but now that I come to think of it, I don't think I ever really could. Like he can't even remember his own, he's so old and like depressed. And he just kind of almost seems happy to be around people, but he's also a monster who wants to eat them. So it's like, it's kind of a genius idea. And I think the script is good and the performances are great. It just doesn't always click.
Actually, it's weird because, like I said, Udo Kier not doing much here, but my favorite line in the movie is his when they're shouting, he and the scriptwriter later are shouting, he ate a bat. And Kier's like, he was drunk.
That's right. Oh man, when he grabs that bat, that's amazing.
Yeah.
They're like, oh man, what a dedicated actor, because they think it's all method.
Well, I love the way he plays the death scene too, because like said Jeff, he's really into it. You can tell, like when he's playing that death scene, even though he wants nothing more than to get that actress and to suck her blood. He's like, okay, but you got to play the death scene first. He's like, oh, okay, cool. And then he's like super into it. He's like clutching at his heart. He's really going for it.
Yeah, the ending was beautiful. Actually, I mean, again, I kind of came off sounding neutral on this movie, and I guess maybe I like it more than I think because the ending really worked for me in a way that I didn't expect because it's like he keeps acting as he knows he's going to die. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how I interpreted it. I mean, John Malkovich, he keeps rolling the camera. I mean, Malkovich is great in this scene. And he says, if it's not in the frame, it's not real, which I guess you can interpret that a couple ways. But to me, it was kind of like here, I'm going to, your story's now on, you've been lived forever. You don't remember your life. You're depressed, but your story is now going to be captured on camera. And, we need this death scene. And Dafoe cooperates. He goes back, he does the scene. And he knows the light's coming in the room and he still kind of walks towards the camera and lets himself die. It's like he's performing his own death. And it's beautiful. I mean, in a movie that I only think I like a little bit, I mean, it's kind of a beautiful ending.
You don't have to pretend that the first half of the movie doesn't exist because it's not good.
Okay. All right, fair enough.
And Defoe's doing something different in the beginning than he is in the end. Again, I think that there was something edited out because when Elway shows up, Defoe starts playing it much more herky-jerky and erratically, and it gets way better when he starts doing that. But it makes sense. Like he talks about when Malkovich first threatens him because he's not doing everything he wants to get the movie made. The vampire says, I don't know how you can threaten me. I don't even know how to hurt myself. So you get the vibe that dying seems pretty okay to him. So if he can go out with a big bang and some bad special effects, then then there you go. I think we've about covered it. And now I'm going to, well, I would apologize, but it seemed y'all liked it. I recommended for you guys The Passion of Joan of Arc because it is far and away one of the most highly regarded movies of all time. It was clearly cutting edge, groundbreaking when it came out. American audience had never seen anything like it. None of the silent films we've watched to date look anything like this movie, mostly because Maria Falconetti's, it's mostly her face and then the face of a bunch of ugly guys who are made up to look much uglier.
Actually, the story is Dreyer didn't let them wear makeup, so it's just hairstyles and their faces.
That's wild. Wow. I kind of don't believe that, but they look very made up. But I think you're right. I think it's lighting and hair. Either way, it's a really stark looking movie. It's about Joan of Arc's trial and then the end of her life. I also didn't like this. I watched this on an overseas airplane. So as I was feeling like I was being tied to the stake, I was watching her plead for her life. It just was, from modern sensibility, it's not going to work. You have to really get yourself into a mindset to watch a movie like this. I will say I've never seen anything like it before, but I'd love to know, Jake, I know you loved it, so tell me why.
For basically what you kind of said right there, I've never seen anything like this before. I don't believe I've ever seen a movie where there's not a single medium or long shot in the entire movie, where everything is done in close-ups and everything is done. Basically, it's all one set that they just frame and shoot differently and just like angled differently. It's so unique looking, and I love just the dichotomy of the way the characters look, like the way the way they shoot her versus the way they shoot the other guys, like just how angry and feral they're looking. I mean, they're literally like spitting as they talk to her. I think they captured a lot of emotion without having to hear the voices. It's different. Like I said, it's different from a lot of the other movies that we've watched, and I'm not sure what I'd even be able to compare it to, in its time or since.
Brad said it's regarded among many people as one of the great films of all time, and I guess I'm a believer, and that's why I wanted to be on this episode, because I think I saw that neither of you had seen it before, and I was just I was like, oh, I actually really like to be on that episode. The other thing I should say is I've only seen this twice before this week, and I hadn't seen it in over 10 years. The first time I saw it was probably 20 years ago, maybe, and I loved it. And then I watched it again, I don't know, 13, 14 years ago, and I loved it that time too. But I don't know if this happens to you guys, but do you ever kind of avoid movies because you're afraid that the experience won't match your memory? And
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, so I loved it so much, and I just was like, that movie is a special experience for me. And I was just I've been afraid. I mean, it's been over a decade. I've been afraid to rewatch it because I thought, what if I don't like, if I don't like it, then that's a great memory of my life. It's a great piece of art that means a lot to me, and suddenly it wouldn't anymore. So I've been sort of avoiding it. So it was almost like I thought, I'm going to pick 1929, even though the movie's 1928. But I'm going to pick 1929 on their list, and I'm gonna force myself to confront this movie. And I'm happy to say that I loved it again. I was totally taken with it. I love the style of the film that Jake's describing. Both of you, I mean, you're totally right. There's like nothing you've seen before. And this is my memory from seeing it the first time, is I remember thinking, it looks like an alien was given film technology and just like, here, this is how it works. Why don't you try to make something, and it's like Dreyer had never seen a movie before when he shot this. There's no establishing shots. I mean, very few. It's all close-ups. If there's a visual motif besides close-up, it's probably white space. I mean, I think there's 4 settings in the film, but the close-ups taken of Joan in the trial room versus her prison cell versus outside. I mean, they could all be the same place because the sky is stark white and she's framed against the sky half the time. The walls, there's no decoration in any of these things. So it's really just faces on white walls. And I think there's an energy in the style that shocks me from something this old. But a lot of times something like Nosferatu, you're like, oh, that's really cool that they were able to get this creepy image in 1922. I don't feel that way about watching Passion of Joan of Arc. I feel like this camera's moving and the editing style is fast. And I don't take a break to think, oh, this is historically interesting. I just think this is working for me. Like I'm involved. I'm taken on the journey of this film right from the get-go, from the style of it. And I guess, the reason so this is what I think is impressive about the movie. And I guess the reason I love the movie, to go back to Nosferatu briefly, it's German expressionism is like the period of the 1920s German cinema, and it's kind of, expressionism, it's like what's on the interior presented in film is kind of the idea. I remember when I was studying German expressionism, a lot of critics think this is kind of BS. I mean, these movies from Germany, they're not really expressing what's on the interior. Maybe something like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is, which is sort of famous for doing that because it's all from the mind of a crazy person. It's got a framing device for that reason. Right. But most of the films aren't actually like that. Whereas Passion of Joan of Arc, not, again, just to be clear, not German expressionism. This is a French film by a Danish filmmaker. This is real expressionism to me. I mean, I feel like this filmmaking style is really putting you in Joan's headspace, and specifically not her point of view. I mean, there's a few point of view shots where you actually, there's an eye line match and you see what she's seeing, but I don't think there's a lot. I think you're really being put in her headspace of intensity, of like, she's just this really passionate, devout person who's in this high stress situation. And so I just think that the style really helps to bring that out. And boy, I guess I have a lot to say here.
Well, this is why you're on the shows.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess if I just keep going on that briefly, it's kind of funny that you can't say it's not a religious film. It's clearly a religious film, and it is funny that here we are, two Jews and an atheist, the day before Easter, talking about this very Christian movie. But to me, it's like it's almost as much anti-religion as it is religious, because it's the church that's doing this to her. I mean, it's certainly anti-church. I mean, this movie's anti-organized religion, I would argue, because it's the Church of England, but the Catholic Church isn't getting a shout out. I mean, she's not praising the Pope or talking about Catholicism, which would be the historical context, I suppose. The Church of England are the villains. Yeah, I meant to look into this, because I honestly am pretty clueless about the real history of Joan of Arc. Which
I'll talk more about it in a minute, but she was sold out.
Great. But so I feel like the organized religion is kind of the villain, and I think one of the great parts in the movie is they say if you don't confess or that you're a liar, you'll be abandoned by the church and you'll be alone. And she says, "I'll be alone with God." And so even though I'm not a religious person, and I'm always drawn to art that sort of is serious about transcendence, if that doesn't sound corny, I really think it's beautiful and as long as it's not done in a proselytizing way, right? Which I know the Christians are usually really big on, is sort of trying to convert you. I don't think there's any real conversion. I don't feel that at all as someone who's an atheist watching this film. I don't feel like it's a rah Christianity. I mean, I think Jesus gets one shout out at the very end in the movie. She says Jesus. Otherwise, the J word doesn't even come up. The important thing is you see that she believes it, and you see that she's devout. We're not even told that she knows what she's talking about. I mean, you're given a lot of reasons to doubt that she doesn't answer the questions about Saint Michael. She evades. I mean, you're like, maybe she's just doesn't. She thinks she's talked to God, but the film doesn't really say that she has. You just see that she believes. And I think that the completely unique film style that Dreyer, has sort of makes this sort of devotion and transcendence and ultimately her death and suffering, it just makes me feel it. And I have to say, I get emotional. And I cried watching the end of the movie. I just find it stunning. If the British Film Institute hears me on this podcast and hears my brilliant thoughts, and in 2032 they invite me to submit my Sight and Sound poll, this would be on my top 10.
Yeah, well, and it's such a disorienting movie too. Yeah, for that first little bit, and when I was reading about it, I didn't know a lot of I know it's not dialogue or anything, but a lot of what they're saying is actually taken from the actual trials of Joan of Arc, where they didn't dress up the dialogue or anything like that. A lot of it is actually what was being said there. And Jeff, I think you pointed this out a little bit too, where there's a lot of the framing where it's coming at her, where she's hearing, where so much is coming at her at so many different times, and sometimes it'll show kind of what she's looking at, but sometimes it doesn't. There's the camera angles are coming at it from different sides. It's this really disorienting effect where it's coming from kind of all over the place. It's a really, really unusual effect, and it really kind of absorbs you in the movie in a way that even Nosferatu or other silent movies of the era just didn't captures the action in a completely different way than other silent movies did.
Because Dreyer doesn't have many more legacy films, and because its star didn't make any movies after this, she notoriously was anti-film and pro-theater and didn't understand why people like to watch her act.
Amazing.
From a modern movie nerd perspective, it's hard to take this movie and jump off into oh, now I should watch this and now I should watch this, because what's the big French film movement, the French New Wave? It's nothing like this. But the French film Anatomy of a Fall has a scene that is very clearly inspired by this movie. It's my favorite scene in the movie, when the young son who's blind is testifying, and because he can't see who's speaking to him, we don't see who's speaking to him, but we follow him as his head moves back and forth towards the voices he hears. It's the most, I think, by far the most compelling scene in the movie, except maybe the flashback fight between the woman and her husband. And I didn't know, because I hadn't seen The Passion of Joan of Arc when I saw Anatomy of a Fall, that it's very obviously pulling, it's a courtroom scene where this is happening. So it's pretty clearly pulling from this, and it's great that legacy exists.
I thought of Saint Omer a little bit too. I was sort of this is the French courtroom drama, but totally different than the ones we've seen.
Have either of you seen Luc Besson's The Messenger, the story of Joan of Arc?
Never did it.
So that was my first interaction with this story, and it's Mila Jovovich as Joan of Arc, because she was married to Luc Besson. Unfortunately, Luc Besson's legacy sucks, because he's made 20 films and most of them are bad. His career got a little bit derailed by Harvey Weinstein, because he became obsessed with an animated series, an animated children's book called Arthur. Well, it ended up being called Arthur and the Invisibles when they made it into a movie, when he made it into a movie, and then a trilogy of movies. And Weinstein, who was notorious for getting too involved in films, chopped it to bits to make it more appealing for an American audience, quote unquote, and he made it terrible. Although I doubt it was any good to begin with. You can now watch, as of I think last year, the Luc Besson version of this movie, which is kind of cool. It's on Tubi. All that is to say, before that happened to him, and long before he made the stinker Valerian and A Million Worlds, and long before he was accused, although I think he's been, at least in court, exonerated.
Yeah, there was lack of evidence, but he's had a few more accusers.
Yeah, I mean,
So
you don't get a reputation like that without being a scumbag. Before all that, he made 4 movies in the 90s that were bangers. He made La Femme Nikita, Leon the Professional, The Fifth Element, and then Joan of Arc. While he was on The Fifth Element, he left his wife, who was also in The Fifth Element, for Mila Jovovich, who was very young and in The Fifth Element, so not a great guy. I think his version of The Messenger is really dope. It's nothing like this. It's a more of a cradle to grave. Now, she was 19 when she died, so there's not much life to be had. But the stuff of her as a child with her religious awakening, which is really psychedelic in the way that he portrays it, right up until then it shows her meeting, played by John Malkovich, apropos for this episode, the would-be king of France, the uncrowned king of France. And she fights for him and wins him his crown. It's got a great cast of French actors who fight alongside, who don't believe in her and then fight alongside her as she's this religious messianic figure. And then she's betrayed by, once he has his crown, he betrays her, leaves her to be caught and then interrogated by the church. And I think the coolest thing about the movie, this was meant to be a major blockbuster. This was a movie that Besson was developing with Catherine Bigelow. Then he more or less stole it from her. She sued him. They settled out of court. But this was supposed to be her movie. Hard to know if a woman or a Frenchman should have made it. You could go either way. But what I think is so neat is when they finally get to this part, the Passion of Joan of Arc, the trial part of the story, you have a very similar, everyone interrogating her is ugly and nasty and conspiring against her. And then it's her alone in her cell having an argument with her conscience, portrayed by Dustin Hoffman in a cloak.
For real?
Wow.
Yeah. It's I think it's amazing where he's the one who's like, you have this, she had these visions of Jesus earlier in the movie and she's dancing with him and it's a little bit predatory. The way that this movie handles religion is also very interesting. And then, was that Hoffman's challenging her? Was that Jesus? Was that the devil? Are you following God? Or were you always just holding a banner? Or were you sometimes holding a sword? How many men did you actually kill? And so there's like a back and forth between them. And honestly, the fact that Jovovich had this in her is pretty wild considering she married a different guy and then did his Resident Evil films for the rest of her.
Oh, they're married.
The other Paul Anderson, right?
The other Paul Anderson, right?
Yeah.
Paul W.S. Anderson.
W.S., yeah.
She's good. I mean, like she's good in The Fifth Element, but it's like sort of she's more of an object than a person. But here the whole movie rests on her and she's very, very good. So I recommend it. It's not the same. It takes a totally different view and it was panned. It bombed and it was panned. And I think
that's why I never saw it, probably, is that, the reviews were pretty bad. So
I'm telling you, this movie rocks.
Yeah.
If you only look at Luc Besson's career in the 90s, he's one of the best. Unfortunately, his career went on past the 90s.
You want me to tie this whole episode together right now? You want me to put a big old bow on this? Luc Besson right now is working on, do you guys know this? Have you heard this?
A Dracula movie?
Dracula, A Love Tale, an upcoming vampire horror film written and directed by Luc Besson based on the 1897 novel Dracula by Bram Stoker.
Wow.
I don't have faith.
Starring Caleb Landry Jones as Dracula and Christoph Waltz as something.
Oh, I don't hate that.
That's interesting. Wait,
probably Van Helsing is my guess.
Oh, Van Helsing. Yeah.
Okay, so he hasn't made a good movie in 25 years, but maybe.
I will say there's another Joan of Arc movie that people like a lot, Robert Bresson, the famous French filmmaker that's one of mine, never did it. So I've never seen a Bresson film. I think he's more famous for like A Man Escaped and Pickpocket, but he made a movie called Trial of Joan of Arc, which is just like Passion of Joan of Arc, I think only focused on the trial. It's supposed to be really good. So I've never seen it though. So never did it, to use the parlance of the pod.
Yeah. There's also a Méliès, George Méliès has like an 11-minute short film that's on like Paramount Plus or whatever, wherever the Méliès short films are. There's a Joan of Arc short film on there. It's like a 10 or 11 minutes long.
They're public domain. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
If it's a Méliès movie, it's one of the first movies ever produced and or professional movies ever produced, and you can probably just find it on YouTube if you don't have Paramount Plus.
Speaking of like finding stuff, did you guys both watch this on the Criterion channel? Passion of Joan of Arc? I'm just curious.
I must have, because that's the only place where I could have downloaded something to watch on the plane.
Okay.
Yeah, I watched it on
Okay.
Criterion. Yep.
Okay. Well, one thing I just want to say, because obviously I like the movie a lot, it means a lot to me. I've only ever seen the film with the 1994, I think it is, Voices of Light soundtrack, which is the default soundtrack it was on the Criterion disc, and it now is on the Criterion channel. It's kind of, silent film's interesting that way, right? Because I think Nosferatu had an original score, and I read it was partly lost. I agree with you, Brad, by the way, that the Nosferatu score is terrible.
Yeah,
the one that you were referring to actually is a recreation of the partly lost original score. So that's why people push it, because it's like somehow like slightly more authentic. But I think it's really, really bad. It's just really, really bad. Whereas Passion of Joan of Arc, there was no like official score, and Dreyer had said he didn't really like having music with his silent films, which is crazy to me. So a lot of people have written scores for this movie. The 1994 Voices of Light, it's like choral,
Yeah.
And to me, I probably wouldn't have the same experience without the music. I mean, it's not like I don't listen to the music normally. I mean, I hadn't heard the music since the last time I saw the movie, but it was familiar right away, because the music also means a lot to me. And I think silent film kind of works like music when it's good. It's something about imagery and sound, taking the dialogue out. So anyway, for anyone who's listening to this and considering watching Passion of Joan of Arc, please watch The Voices of Light, because I think it's fantastic, and it adds a lot. And I'm sure wouldn't like the movie as much if it wasn't for that soundtrack as well. It's kind of funny to credit, because we like to talk about an auteur, right? The director being in charge of everything, and it's like, to me, the movie doesn't work without the 1994 score. But that's kind of my feeling.
Yeah, I don't think auteurism was a thing yet in the 1920s.
No, true. Yeah, it was not.
Yeah.
All right, Jake, these are two foreign films that came out in different years than the year that we're examining. So I don't know what awards situation is for either of them.
No, I mean, as far as Oscars, which is what we usually talk about, I mean, there was none. I mean, Nosferatu, it came out in Germany in like 1922, didn't make its way to the States until 1929. And I don't think the Oscars were even awarding after like the first year. I don't think there were really many silent films that were even being nominated for anything. Passion of Joan of Arc there was less of a delay, where it came out in 1928 in Europe and then came here, to the States in 29. But yeah, there was still no awards, no Oscars to speak of. But
I knew that you wouldn't have an Oscar section here, Jake, which I think is obviously is a great look at what people thought of the films when they came out. But there's the other side of things, is the canon. What do people think now of these movies? And so I did pull up the Sight and Sound, which is kind of the famous canon thing that comes out every 10 years and creates a lot of discussion, and then people forget all about it. But I did look this up. Passion of Joan of Arc in the 2022 Sight and Sound poll, critics poll, comes in at number 21 and is the fourth highest silent film, which I thought was worth noting, taking a look at, because it's kind of hard to compare silent films sometimes with sound films, because they can be such a different genre. I mean, even it almost feels like a different medium sometimes. To Brad's point earlier, silent cinema comedy is what holds up so well, because there's nothing like it. I mean, it's so dependent. It's so funny still, because it's all based on the imagery, whereas when you add sound dramas, a silent drama looks so boring most of the time compared to what we can do when you add sound. But silent comedy still works, so it's just kind of hard to compare. But I thought it was kind of neat that there's only 3 silent films on this list ahead of Passion of Joan of Arc, and Nosferatu does not come in on the top 100, though in the expanded 2022 list it does come in at like 197 on the top 250, which is as much as they publish. Interesting.
No accounting for taste.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Well, actually, and while we're on it, Murnau, his Sunrise, which no spoilers, I suppose, but there will be more Murnau on your list unless you guys change the list, number 11 on the Sight and Sound poll. So that is actually the second highest silent film after Man with a Movie Camera, which is number 9, and is also documentary. So Sunrise is actually the top narrative film. So you guys will talk about Murnau 2 more times, actually, just, not to spoil anything, but unless you guys change what I saw, it's kind of Murnau's kind of dominating your silent era with 3 of the years.
Cool. Jake, what other movies? So I can't do a top of 1923 or 1929, because the only other 1929 film I saw was a short film by a man named Walt Disney called Mickey Mouse's Haunted House, which is incredible. And really, really pioneering for the medium, actually, and is available on Disney Plus. Actually, only as of pretty recently, and worth checking out. But it's not a movie; it's not a feature film.
Yeah, the only other movie from 1929 that I've seen besides the 2 that we talked about today is the Best Picture winner from that year, which is The Broadway Melody, which is an okay musical. It's fine, but not it's not super memorable or great or anything. It would certainly be a distant number 3 after the two that we discussed at length today.
Well, Jeff, thank you for coming on. Now that we've had you, we're definitely going to have you on again at some point because for one thing, you're one of our mascots, and for another, really enjoyed your insight into these movies.
Oh, well, thanks. It was a pleasure being here. I'm a big fan, and I'm honored to be here on your golden episode.
If you want to know what is coming out next week, go to our Letterboxd profile. You can find me at Brad Garoon on Letterboxd. I think Jake, you're Jake Ziegler on Letterboxd.
Yep, it's Jake_Ziegler.
And both of us have pinned to our profiles our Never Did It podcast list. You could also just search for the Never Did It podcast list. And the 2 movies that will be discussed on next week's episode are always at the top of that list.
We have a Facebook page now as well. You can check that out at facebook.com/Never Did It podcast. I'll be posting on that with new episodes and just fun updates from time to time about what we're watching and what's coming up.
So check that out. And thank you for joining us for Never Did It.